When we do rainwater harvesting for our buildings, what we are really doing is tapping into the hydrologic cycle, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's the way that water circles around and around. And in fact, so this is off on a tangent already, in fact, it's been the same water circling around and around for the whole history of the planet. In general, water does not go away and water does not get added. It just gets moved around. And so what we are doing with rainwater harvesting is we're borrowing some water from that cycle. We're storing it so we can use it later when we need it. Then we use it, and after we've used it, we put it back. And we might infiltrate it with stormwater treatment or in our landscapes or that kind of thing. Now there's a difference between what you call potable water and non-potable water. And to my knowledge, there are no state building codes that allow us to use rainwater for potable uses. I might be wrong, but that's what I think. And potable means the water has been purified so that it is drinking water quality. It's healthy enough that humans feel they can drink it. And we use potable water for every use in our building, and we don't need to be doing that because we do a lot of things like flushing toilets and washing cars and so forth that could use non-potable water, like we might collect from rainwater off our roof, and that can preserve some of the potable water for other uses. Here's another set of pictures of this Sidwell Friends Middle School in Washington, D.C. that does a lot with water, including up on the roof they do rainwater harvesting, which is why this is here. But in terms of non-potable uses, we can use, legally, we can use rainwater for all kinds of things. In our cooling system, as makeup water in our cooling towers, for flushing toilets, in fire sprinklers, for irrigating plants both inside and outside. Now, in the U.S., state laws determine whether you can use rainwater harvesting at all. And this is the most current map of what the state laws are. They kind of change over time, but this is from 2020. I got this from the U.S. Department of Energy just today, so this is fresh. It's kind of interesting that so here in Oregon, where in Western Oregon anyway, it's wet, and Washington where it's wet, state building code allows us to harvest rainwater, at least for non-potable uses. But look here, Colorado, which is dry, a lot of it is that wide open, dry plain stuff. They could really use some harvested rainwater, and they basically don't allow it, so that's just kind of hard to fathom. Nevada is the same way. There is a professional organization of rainwater harvesting professionals, and it is called ARCSA, American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. And you can go to their website and download various kinds of free resources. And in addition, they have collaborated with the American Society of Plumbing Engineers to create this actual standard, plumbing engineering standard. Basic idea is that there are 6 elements in a rainwater harvesting system, and in the following PowerPoints we're going to go through them. You catch the water on the roof, you convey it through pipes and gutters, you filter it to keep the sticks and moss and gunk out, you store it in tanks or cisterns, then you get it out of the tank and cistern and distribute it, either through gravity or with pumps. And finally, if you're someplace where by some miracle you can use it for potable use, you would be required to purify it. the catchment is essentially a roof. Now, if you're designing a rainwater system, you go through a process, a methodical process, because what you have to figure out is how much water do you need and how much water can you get from the sky. I once heard a presentation by an engineer who was doing rainwater harvesting up in the Puget Sound and those islands up there that are real rocky and don't have much access to well water. And he had a real wealthy client who was trying to be mindful and wanted rainwater harvesting, and so hired this engineer to do the design. And the engineer went to the client's house and started talking about, okay, what do you use water for? And it turned out they wanted a swimming pool, and they had a big fountain, and they had 4 bathrooms that were big. And so he had to explain, you know, you're going to have to scale back your water usage. So what we do is we look at some average numbers. Approximately how much water does, let's say you're doing a house, how much water does the average residents use per person? And those numbers are known and published. We can look them up. And then we have to look up how much rain do we get out of the sky in the place where we live. So what I've got on the screen here, if you squint at those little letters, you can see these are climate data for Eugene, Oregon, from the U.S. Climate Data Center. And you can get that from NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. So anyway, you get the rainfall data, and you also notice that in the wintertime it rains a lot. In the hot summertime it doesn't rain so much. So you have to keep track of that too. How much are you getting in each month? And then you do what you could think of as kind of a balancing your checkbook sort of method. So you start with how much water you get. You subtract how much water you're going to use that month. That gives you a balance you can carry over. And you keep doing this, adding the rainfall that you get, subtracting the amount you're going to use. And all of this tells you how much you're going to need, and that also lets you figure out how big a cistern, a tank, you're going to need. So how many gallons per day will you use, and how many days are there during that period when rain doesn't fall? That's the size of tank you need. I stuck a few useful numbers in here for you in case you want to do any figuring for yourself. And along those lines, let me just point out in this list of sources that there are several sources here that are helpful. I would in particular call your attention to this top one, Rainwater Collection for the Mechanically Challenged. And this comes from some people in Texas. Texas is a leader in rainwater harvesting. It's a big place, it's dry, and there are a lot of ranchers and farmers who need water, so they have paid close attention to rainwater harvesting. And these people here wrote a book for people who want to do it but can't figure out how, which is most of us. At the very end of this list of sources, you'll also notice there's a, oh, that's an old one. Texas published the Texas Guide to Rainwater Harvesting. I think I've put the new guide in your lectures folder. Then there are a couple here from Heather Kincaid Lavario, who is an ARCSA member and specializes in rainwater harvest design. You can get those books at pretty much any library, I think. And then here's a book by Allison Kwok, who's an architecture professor at the U of O, and she has chapters on all kinds of strategies, including rainwater harvest, and so on and so forth. I wasn't prepared.